A light crashes from the rafters. A scream, off script, pierces the soundstage. The cameras stop rolling, but the horror doesn't. There are stories Hollywood doesn't tell us on press tours. Stories whispered between gaffers and grips. Stories about accidents, about deaths, about unexplained fires, cursed props, and priests called in to bless the set. Stories that make you wonder, what's really lurking behind the scenes? From skeletons in suburban swimming pools to a bullet that should have been a blank. Some films are said to carry more than just artistic weight. They carry a curse. But what if I told you the most powerful curse isn't supernatural at all? What if the true haunting lives inside of us? I'm Casey, and today on Hauntings and Happenings, we're stepping beyond the screen into the shadows of cinema. We'll explore some of Hollywood's most infamous cursed productions, The Exorcist, Poltergeist, The Crow, and more, and uncover the psychology behind our obsession with fear, mystery, and tragedy. Are these tales of misfortune just eerie coincidences? Or is there something deeper at play? Something in the human mind that wants to believe that horror is real? Because in Hollywood, fear sells. And sometimes the most powerful myths are the ones we make ourselves. Before we talk about what it means to be cursed, we have to understand what people really mean when they say it. A Hollywood curse isn't your run-of-the-mill superstition. It's not about bad luck or on-set mishaps. It's about a pattern, often deadly, always chilling, that seems to haunt a film from its first frame to far beyond its final cut. In these stories, coincidence becomes conspiracy, accidents become omens, and tragedy becomes legacy. Maybe the script was too dark. Maybe the subject matter was too sacred or too profane. Maybe something was summoned. Maybe something followed them home. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. A trail of misfortune attached to the film like a shadow you can't shake. You've probably heard the names before. Poltergeist, where real skeletons were used in a flooded pool scene, and nearly every young cast member died in some tragic way. The Exorcist, a film so terrifying that theaters hired paramedics, and so plagued with fires, deaths, and eerie accidents that a priest was brought in to cleanse the set. The Crow, where Brandon Lee, son of the martial arts legend Bruce Lee, was shot and killed by a prop gun in a moment that paralleled the film's own storyline. Rebel Without a Cause, the iconic James Dean gone before the premiere, and both of his co-stars doomed in tragic ends. The Superman franchise, haunted by misfortune, from George Reeves' mysterious death to Christopher Reeve's paralysis and the tragic fates of others who wore the cape. This idea isn't limited to a few famous cases. In an article titled Top 10 Most Cursed Movie Roles, writer Josh Morrison notes that in nearly every decade of filmmaking, you can find at least one role of poor production surrounded by whispers of something dark. Morrison points to patterns across films like The Omen, Rosemary's Baby, and even Twilight Zone the movie, where actor Vic Morrow and two child actors were killed during a horrific helicopter accident. In these stories, superstition thrives where logic falters. A single tragic incident becomes a sign. A second incident? Now that becomes proof. And from there, it only takes a few headlines and the right marketing spin before myth is mistaken for memory. As journalist Georgi Papuashvili observes in The Tragic Fate of Rebels Without a Cause, The idea of a curse is often retroactively applied. The myth tends to form in hindsight, he writes, after audiences are already familiar with the cast's tragic endings. His point is key. We build the curse. We stitch it together from fragments, from grief, from narrative instinct. These aren't just scary stories. They're cultural artifacts, legends built into the bones of the films themselves. Even if you don't believe in curses, it's hard to deny the pattern and the power these stories hold over us. But why? Why do these particular tragedies become mythologized? Why do we return to them again and again in morbid curiosity? We'll explore the marketing of fear, how Hollywood doesn't just survive these stories, it thrives on them. Because in the business of storytelling, nothing quite sells like a good scare. So here's the real twist in our tale. Not only do these so-called curses stick with us, they sell. Fear doesn't just entertain, it moves us. It bypasses logic, cuts straight to our instincts, and leaves a lasting impression. And Hollywood knows it. From horror trailers that warn viewer discretion is advised, to behind-the-scenes stories of mysterious injuries and untimely deaths, studios understand that fear is a powerful tool, not just on screen, but in promotion. In her article, Psychology of Fear in Advertising, Unleashing Emotional Impact in Marketing, author Sarah Renz explains that fear is a primal emotion hardwired into our brain as a survival mechanism, and tapping into it can trigger a strong emotional response in the audience, increasing the chance that a message will be remembered and acted on. And Renz isn't alone. In The Power and Pitfalls of Fear-Based Marketing, Dara Mandalia puts it bluntly, fear is a powerful emotion. When people are scared, they act fast. They make decisions based on instinct rather than logic, and that's what marketers tap into. And there's one thing horror marketers love. It's an audience that acts. Whether it's buying a ticket, sharing a headline, or rewatching a film because something about it felt cursed. Fear-based marketing in film operates on 3 levels. First is exclusivity. You're not just watching a movie. You're braving an experience others won't. That beast called FOMO, the fear of missing out on a film so controversial, so terrifying that others are whispering about it. And lastly, perceived threat. What if the curse is real? What if just watching it puts you at risk? In the 3 Copywriting Essentials for Effective Fear-Based Marketing, Ravi Trivedi writes that marketers hone in on 3 things: creating a sense of exclusivity, making the consumer feel like they will miss out, and making them fear a future threat. These tactics show up in film history again and again. When The Exorcist debuted, audiences were so rattled by what they saw that theaters provided barf bags and called in medics. Were people genuinely ill? Or were they primed to feel that way? As Mandalia notes, fear-based ads are remembered best by consumers, and these ads perform 2 times better than rational ones. The reason? They highlight a risk and position the brand as the solution. And this is where it becomes especially clever in the case of cursed movie sets. The film itself becomes the risk. The story around the film becomes part of the thrill. Colin Shaw, in his article, Fear, One of the Greatest Marketing Motivators of Human Behavior, reflects on why fear works on entertainment specifically. We like the excitement of it and the adrenaline boost it gives us, but only when it is in a safe space where we aren't in any real danger. Watching a cursed movie is just that, a safe danger. It's a risk without any risk. Horror, but curated. There's also a deeper psychological mechanism at play. Terror management theory, or TMT. In terror management theory for psychology today, Dr. Sheldon Solomon explains that when reminded of our mortality, we cling more tightly to cultural symbols that give life meaning. Horror films already brush up against death, but when someone actually dies during a production, it hits harder. It becomes personal. The brush with mortality makes the film feel more dangerous and more sacred. A cursed movie is no longer just a story, it's a relic. Watching it becomes a ritual. We know someone died making it, and that knowledge draws us in even closer. And even if no curse exists, our brain may think it does. Psychologists Timothy Wilson and Daniel Gilbert, in their work on effective forecasting, found that people are notoriously bad at predicting how events will make them feel, but that anticipating fear can actually intensify the feeling itself. In other words, if you expect a cursed movie to scare you more, it probably will. So when a film has a story, an urban legend, a tragedy, or a so-called curse attached to it, the audience brings their own tension to the seat. Every flickering light, every dark shadow on the screen feels realer, closer, and worse. Coming up next, we'll explore how fear doesn't just affect individuals. It spreads. Because in a theater, or a society, fear isn't just a feeling, it's a contagion. Few films have inspired as much real-world dread as Poltergeist. Marketed as a supernatural thriller, it quickly became infamous, not just for its on-screen horrors, but for what followed behind the scenes. The so-called Poltergeist curse centers on the sudden and eerie deaths of cast members, the questionable use of real human remains on set, and a string of odd events that have made even the most skeptical filmgoers wonder, was something haunting this production? Let's start with the deaths. Dominique Dune, who played Dana Freeling, was strangled to death by her abusive ex-boyfriend in 1982. Just months after the film's release. She was 22. Julian Beck, who played the terrifying Preacher Cain in Poltergeist 2, died of stomach cancer in 1985, before the film even hit theaters. Will Sampson, a spiritual leader and actor in Poltergeist 2, died during a controversial heart-lung transplant surgery. He was known for performing a real exorcism on set prior to filming, in hopes of cleansing any dark energy. Heather Rorick, the iconic Carol Ann, died unexpectedly in 1988 from septic shock caused by a misdiagnosed congenital intestinal issue, shortly before Poltergeist 3 was completed. She was just 12. In her piece, Poltergeist Movie Curse True Story, Maggie Panos emphasizes how Heather's death stunned both fans and filmmakers. She had flu-like symptoms one day and was gone the next. The diagnosis came too late. For many, it was the final nail in the coffin of what was already being whispered about as a cursed film series. But even more chilling is what happened during filming. One of the most iconic scenes in the original film is when Diane Freeling, played by Jo Beth Williams, falls into a waterlogged backyard pool filled with skeletons. The scene was filmed during a night shoot, in cold, filthy water. Williams assumed the bones were props. until she found out otherwise. As Panos recounts, those were real human skeletons. Special effects artists used actual cadaver remains because it was cheaper than manufacturing fake ones. That revelation horrified the cast and fed directly into the curse's mythology. In a 2002 interview on VH1's I Love the 80s, Williams confirmed this, saying, "I assumed they were fake. I found out, through the crew mind you, that they were using real skeletons. It was cheaper. I was in muddy water, face to face with actual bones. That's when things got spooky." And they sure did. Richard Lawson, who starred in Poltergeist, survived a deadly 1992 plane crash in which 27 of the 51 people on board died. He later claimed it was a moment that made him believe in fate and spiritual protection. Craig T. Nelson also revealed that the cast and crew were uneasy during the filming of sequels. There were reports of unexplained technical malfunctions, shadowy figures, and an overall feeling of unease on set. Even the 2015 remake couldn't escape speculation. Entertainment Weekly noted that a real clown doll used in the scene began moving on its own during shooting, a callback to a terrifying toy in the original. The Poltergeist curse remains one of the most enduring examples of cinematic myth-making. Whether it was bad luck, behind-the-scenes decisions, or something darker, it's clear this franchise has never been able to fully rest in peace. Now, when The Exorcist hit theaters in 1973, it didn't just scare audiences. It shook them. Viewers fainted, vomited, and fled the theater. Some claimed to feel possessed. Others reported a strange heaviness in their chest that lingered long after the credits rolled. But what happened off-screen may be even more terrifying. The so-called Exorcist curse has haunted the film's legacy for decades. Its list of strange deaths, serious injuries, freak accidents, and spiritual panic reads like a script rewrite from the devil himself. Let's start with the incidents during production. Firstly, the set of the McNeil home caught fire early in the shoot, delaying filming for 6 weeks. The blaze was reportedly caused by a pigeon flying into a circuit box. Strangely, Reagan's bedroom, the site of the possession, was the only room left untouched. In The Exorcist Cursed Explained from Hello Magazine, the fire is described as one of several freak accidents that disrupted production and fed into growing anxiety among the cast and crew. To address growing unease, director William Friedkin brought in a Jesuit priest, Father Thomas Birmingham, to bless the set. He also played a minor role in the film and was reportedly unnerved by the strange atmosphere on set. Actress Ellen Burstyn suffered a spinal injury while filming a scene where she was yanked backward by a stunt harness. Her scream of pain in the film is real. Years later, she recalled, "I was lifted and slammed into the floor. I screamed, and they used that take. I had a permanent back injury." Linda Blair, just 14 at the time, also sustained a spinal injury in a scene where she thrashed in bed during a demonic episode. The harness malfunctioned, and she cried out in pain. That footage also remained in the final cut. But the injuries were only the beginning. Death stalked the production. Actor Jack McGowan, who played Burke Dennings, died of influenza shortly after completing his scenes. Veliski Malioros, who played Father Karras' mother, also died before the film was released. Linda Blair's grandfather died, and a night watchman and a night watchman at the set passed away suddenly. The son of actor Max von Sydow also died during production. A lighting technician also lost several toes in an accident on set. The total number of deaths associated with the film reached 9 before it was even released. In Was the Exorcist Cursed by Stephanie Almazan for American Hauntings, the fear surrounding the film's production is summed up like this: the combination of real tragedy, graphic religious horror, and unexplained incidents created a perfect storm of dread, one that many believed meant the devil was genuinely involved. Even audiences weren't spared. According to Britannica, some viewers experienced seizures, miscarriages, or severe anxiety after watching the film. One woman sued the studio after fainting and breaking her jaw in the theater. Warner Brothers, eager to contain the panic, leaned into it. They distributed barf bags. They let stories of possession rumors and medical emergencies circulate freely. They didn't try to deny the curse, because the fear was selling tickets. And the church took notice. The Catholic Church denounced the film, while some priests reportedly recommended exorcisms to those disturbed by it. Over time, the legend of the curse became inseparable from the film itself. As Almazan writes, whether the accidents were spiritual retribution, demonic interference, or mere coincidence, one thing is clear: the horror of the Exorcist didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. Even the film's director admitted to being shaken. Friedkin later stated in interviews that while he doesn't believe in curses, he won't dismiss what he witnessed. The Exorcist didn't just depict a possession, it became one. Now, The Crow is a Gothic tragedy, on screen and in life. Its story follows a man named Eric Draven, who returns from the grave to avenge his fiance's murder. But what was meant to be a fictional revenge fantasy became a devastatingly real death story. At the center of the curse is Brandon Lee, son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee. Like his father, Brandon died young, unexpectedly, and under strange circumstances. And like his father, his death was steeped in whispers of a curse, one that would forever haunt the legacy of the Crow. On March 31st, 1993, while filming a climactic scene, Lee was shot with what was supposed to be a blank. But due to a horrifying chain of negligence, the gun had a bullet fragment lodged in the barrel from a previous scene. When the blank cartridge was fired, the force was enough to propel the fragment into Brandon Lee's abdomen. He died in surgery at just 28 years old. In The Crow Curse Explained by Keith Deininger, the timeline is outlined in grim detail. The death was a result of a dummy bullet that had been lodged in the gun barrel after a previous scene. It was supposed to be safe, but on that night, it wasn't. Lee's death was made eerier by the fact that his character in the film dies in the exact same way, shot by intruders and left for dead before rising from the grave. And Lee's death was just the most visible tragedy, but it wasn't the first. As detailed in The Crow's Curse Might Be an Urban Legend by Clarissa Lowry of The Independent, production was plagued by strange events. A carpenter was severely burned after his crane struck live power lines. A crew member accidentally drove a screwdriver through his hand. A storm destroyed much of the set, delaying filming. And a stuntman broke several ribs during an early scene. Even before filming began, one of the producers reportedly joked that this movie is cursed. That joke wouldn't land the same way again. What truly cemented the curse in public consciousness, though, was the uncanny parallels between Brandon Lee's fate and his father's. Bruce Lee died in 1973 at the age of 32, under controversial medical circumstances. Conspiracy theories flourished, some claiming the Lee family was cursed by ancient spiritual forces, others suggesting foul play. When Brandon died, the Crow curse fused with the larger mythology of the Lee family curse, giving the tragedy a generational weight. After Brandon's death, production shut down for weeks. Many assumed that the movie would never be completed. But the studio chose to finish it, using stand-ins, digital face replacement, and rewrites. As a result, The Crow became something more than a movie. It became a tombstone, a myth, a posthumous performance that blurred the line between Brandon Lee and Eric Draven. In Cursed Films' The Crow from Movie Meister Reviews, the documentary series is quoted as saying, "The tragedy of Brandon Lee became part of the film's DNA. You're not just watching the performance, you're witnessing a final moment, and that transforms the film into something sacred, something haunted." Multiple attempts to reboot The Crow have floundered. Directors drop out, actors abandon the project. Jason Momoa, Luke Evans, and even Bradley Cooper were attached at various points, only to mysteriously walk away. In The Crow reboot has been cursed from the start, writer Dan Kay notes, "Every attempt to revive the franchise has been met with production chaos, legal disputes, and creative collapse. It's almost as if the film itself refuses to be reborn." To this day, fans gather each year to honor Brandon Lee's birthday at his grave in Seattle's Lakeview Cemetery, where he rests beside his father. The inscription on his tombstone is taken from a passage he shared with his fiancée just weeks before his death. It reads, "Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well." For Brandon Lee, The Crow was his breakthrough role. For the rest of us, it's a chilling reminder of what happens when life, death, and art collide too perfectly. Of all the cursed films in Hollywood legend, Rebel Without a Cause might be the most poetic, and the most chilling in its symmetry. A film about youth spiraling towards destruction, played by actors who would each meet early, tragic, and violent ends. The Curse of Rebel Without a Cause isn't theatrical. It doesn't involve flying set pieces or supernatural accidents. Its horror is quieter, slower, but no less devastating. It begins with the star. James Dean embodied the archetype of the misunderstood outsider. His performance as Jim Stark became the blueprint for teen angst in American cinema. But just weeks before the film's premiere, Dean would die behind the wheel of his Porsche 550 Spider, nicknamed Little Bastard. On September 30th, 1955, Dean collided head-on with another car on Route 466. He was 24 years old. In The Curse of James Dean's Little Bastard Porsche by James Mills for Haggerty UK, the story of the car takes on a sinister life of its own. The wreckage was passed around collectors and museums, until accidents continued to happen. A mechanic working on the car's frame crushed both his legs. 2 doctors who bought parts were injured or killed in subsequent crashes. Even the truck transporting the cars remains to a safety exhibit crashed en route, injuring the driver. As Miles writes, "It was as if the car itself had absorbed the violence of Dean's death and refused to stop hurting people." And the tragedy of Dean was only the beginning. Sal Mineo played Plato, the soft-spoken and troubled teenager who idolized Dean's character. He was nominated for an Academy Award for his performance. But after the film, his career faltered. In 1976, at the age of 37, Mineo was returning home from a rehearsal when he was stabbed to death in an alley behind his apartment. The attack was random, the killer a stranger. And his death, it barely made headlines. In Popoashvili's article, he writes, Mineo's death didn't ignite media frenzy. It was quiet, brutal, and largely ignored, in a way that made it feel even more like a curse fulfilled. Fame to obscurity to violence. And then there's Natalie Wood. She played Judy, rebellious, tender, torn between parental control and emotional chaos. In real life, she would carry her own demons into adulthood. In 1981, while vacationing on a yacht with her husband Robert Wagner and co-star Christopher Walken, Wood disappeared into the dark waters off Catalina Island. Her body was found the next morning. She had bruises and a traumatic head injury. She was 43. Though initially ruled an accident, her death was later reclassified as suspicious in 2011, and Robert Wagner was named a person of interest in the reopened case. Rumors of an argument, intoxication, and foul play have never been put to rest. From the same article by Popoashvili, she died under mysterious circumstances, surrounded by men in the middle of the night. It was a scene eerily evocative of the unresolved trauma her character embodied. All three stars, Dean, Mineo, Wood, gone. All three deaths violent or shrouded in mystery, and all three forever linked to a film about the fragility of youth and the inevitability of death. In a retrospective titled The Salvage Yard, Rebel Without a Cause Curse, the author notes, it's not just that those actors died. It's that they died in ways that echoed their roles. The film became prophecy. Their performances, eulogies. Even minor players weren't spared. Nick Adams, a close friend of Dean and part of the film's inner circle, died of a drug overdose in 1968. While not part of the main cast, his connection to the film's core trio only deepened the mythology. Unlike The Exorcist or Poltergeist, the Rebel curse doesn't feel supernatural. It feels fated. It's slow, creeping kind of doom. The kind that doesn't strike all at once, but waits in the wings for its moment. Now, they say it's bad luck to play God, but in Hollywood, it might be worse to play a hero. For nearly a century, actors who've donned the red cape of Superman have faced misfortune, scandal, career ruin, and untimely death. It's not one incident. It's a pattern, a legacy, a shadow draped across the shoulders of anyone who dares become the Man of Steel. This is the Superman curse, and it might be the most enduring myth in all of pop culture. George Reeves was the first man to wear the S on screen for a generation of children, starring in The Adventures of Superman from 1952 to 1958, where he was a household name, a symbol of strength, immortal to fans. And yet, in June of 1959, Reeves was found dead in his home, killed by a single gunshot to the head. It was ruled a suicide, but the details never sat right. There were no fingerprints on the gun, and Reeves' fiancé and guests were in the house at the time. Rumors swirled about mafia ties, secret affairs, and staged murder. The case remains one of Hollywood's most unsettling cold cases. As Jessica Sager notes in the story behind the infamous and deadly Superman curse, Reeves' death marked the first domino in a string of misfortunes that would haunt the Superman legacy for decades. the symbol of invincibility, had cracked. No one embodied Superman more fully than Christopher Reeve. His portrayal in the 1978 blockbuster and its sequels defined the character for a generation. He was charming, he was powerful, and he was noble. But in 1995, while riding on a horse during an equestrian competition, Reeve was thrown from the saddle. He landed on his head, severing his spinal cord. He never walked again. He would spend the rest of his life as a quadriplegic, becoming an advocate for disability rights and stem cell research before passing away from cardiac arrest in 2004. In the Superman movie Curse Explained, Is It Real?, Niall Gray reflects on the irony. Christopher Reeve made audience believe a man could fly, but after his fall, he became a symbol of endurance and tragedy, embodying a different kind of heroism, one that was more real and far more painful. Other victims of the cape? Margot Kidder, who played Lois Lane opposite Reeve, struggled with bipolar disorder and homelessness before passing away from a drug and alcohol overdose in 2018. Her death was ruled a suicide. Richard Pryor, who starred in Superman 3, publicly battled drug addiction and was later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Lee Quigley, who played baby Kal-El in the 1978 Superman film, died at 14 from solvent abuse. Dana Reeve, Christopher's wife and caretaker, died of lung cancer in 2006, despite never having smoked. Even actors tangentially associated with Superman haven't escaped speculation. From Dean Cain's career collapse to Brandon Routh's lukewarm post-Superman Returns trajectory, the theory goes that the curse doesn't just strike with death. It drags careers into obscurity. While some argue the curse is coincidence, others believe it's cultural, a combination of typecasting and public expectation. As Sager puts it, the role of Superman comes with immense pressure. You become more than an actor. You become an icon. And when that image shatters, the fall can be fatal. Still, the list of tragedies is hard to ignore. And every time a new actor is cast in the role, fans hold their breath, wondering if the cape will bless or break them. Even Henry Cavill, whose tenure as Superman sparked DC Renaissance, found himself unceremoniously dropped from the role in 2022, despite massive fan support and studio promises. Whether supernatural or symbolic, the curse has become part of the mythos. Superman is invincible, but those who play him are all too human. 5 films, 5 legacies, and a trail of tragedy that feels too consistent to dismiss, and yet too scattered to fully explain. Whether it's a bullet that wasn't supposed to fire, a spinal cord that wasn't meant to snap, or a script that seemed to write its actors' fates, each of these stories forces us to look deeper, not just at the films, but at ourselves. Because when we string these accidents together, when we name them curses, we're doing something very human. We're trying to make sense of chaos, to assign a shape to grief, and when enough people believe, that belief becomes something real. We're going to explore how fear and folklore doesn't just haunt individuals. It infects communities. This is where the whisper becomes a rumor, and the rumor becomes hysteria. A fire on set, a freak accident, an untimely death. On their own, they're tragic. But when they cluster around a film, story starts to change. They stop being events and become evidence. Eventually, we're not just watching a movie, we're part of a legend. And that's where the real power of the cursed film lives. Not in the events themselves, but in what we do with them. This is collective myth-making. It's not about ghosts, demons, or devils. It's about us. About what happens when fear, fascination, and grief get passed from one person to the next until the story grows bigger than the truth. In his article, Hollywood Cursed Legends for Skeptical Inquirer, Joe Nickell writes, "The human brain is wired to find patterns. It's a survival mechanism. But when we apply that pattern recognition to unrelated tragedies, we create the illusion of design, of fate. That illusion becomes a framework. We see one death, then another. Suddenly we're expecting a third. The story builds itself. The more we tell it, the more true it feels. This is how folklore forms in real time. Tragedy becomes mythology. Suffering becomes symbolism. And before long, even unrelated incidents get retrofitted into the curse. Before the internet, these stories lived in whispers, magazine spreads, or grainy documentaries on cable. But now they go viral. On forums and TikToks, on Reddit threads and YouTube essays, cursed films take on a life of their own. Audiences amplify the myth. They share interviews where actors express fear. They slow down behind-the-scenes clips looking for signs. They overlay tragedy with eerie music and grainy filters until fact and fiction are indistinguishable. It's what writer Shaw in his article calls narrative contagion. He writes, fear spreads quickly because it's emotionally charged. You're more likely to remember it, repeat it, and believe it, especially when we see others reacting the same way. The more we share the fear, the more real the curse becomes. And believing in a cursed film isn't just about fear. It's about belonging. When you know the backstory of Poltergeist or The Crow or Rebel Without a Cause, you're not just a viewer. You're part of the story. You've been initiated. This is what sociologists call communal myth-making, a shared narrative that connects a group of people emotionally and culturally. It's the same psychological function folklore, ghost stories, and urban legends have always served. In his article, Papu Ashfali puts it beautifully. The myth tends to form in hindsight, after audiences are already familiar with the cast's tragic endings. We want to believe the film was more than a film, that it knew something, that it said something. At the heart of this belief is a very human need, the need for meaning. When someone young and beautiful dies, we want it to mean something. We want it to fit into a story. Otherwise, it's just chaos. And that's scarier than any ghost. Believing in a curse is paradoxically comforting. It turns grief into fate. It transforms a regular tragedy or a random tragedy into a moral tale or a warning. In Gray's article, he notes whether it's symbolic or supernatural, the curse gives people a reason for the unreasonable. Superman was invincible, and the actors who played him weren't. That contradiction demands an explanation, and the curse offers one. So we build the story, and we pass it on, and the more we tell it, the more we believe it, until the myth becomes memory, and a curse becomes canon. But belief is only part of the equation. Because when fear spreads fast enough, wide enough, and deep enough, it can do more than change the narrative. It can change reality. We've seen the tragedies. We've heard the stories, we've counted the bodies. But the deeper question isn't what happened. It's why we care so much that it did. Why do we keep returning to these stories of death and disaster? Why do we replay the final scene of The Crow or whisper about the real skeletons in Poltergeist? Why do we need the Superman curse to be real? It's simple. We want to believe. Random tragedy is unbearable. It's a void, a vacuum. It has no shape, no logic, no resolution. But a curse? A curse is a narrative. A curse tells us there's a cause, a rule, a pattern. It gives the chaos a name. It says this happened because. In terror management theory for psychology today, Dr. Sheldon Solomon explains that when humans are reminded of their mortality, they experience existential anxiety, and they cope by clinging to meaningful narratives and cultural symbols that outlast the self. A cursed film becomes that symbol. It transforms meaningless loss into myth, and myth gives us comfort. Because if there's a reason someone died, if the film is cursed, if the role was doomed, then there's a shape to the suffering. Then it's not just fate or bad luck. It's something bigger. Ironically, believing in the curse makes us feel safer. When we think something is haunted or dangerous or taboo, we behave differently. We heighten our awareness, we stay on guard, we become, at least in our minds, less vulnerable. Psychologist Shaw notes, fear drives action. It makes us focus. It makes us feel in control because we think we can avoid what happened to others by being smarter or more cautious or more prepared. In that way, fear isn't just a response. It's a coping mechanism. And cursed films? They're the perfect conduit because they let us dance with fear in a space that we're not actually at risk. There's also the allure of the liminal, the in-between, the space where fiction and fact blur. A cursed film feels like a secret ritual, a haunted mirror, a message hidden inside the script. When we watch The Exorcist, knowing what happened off camera, the screen feels thinner. The line between what's real and what isn't starts to bend. In that space, belief becomes seductive. The want to feel that we've stumbled upon something forbidden, something almost real. As Sarah Renz explains in Psychology of Fear in Advertising, that's why fear-based storytelling is so effective. It engages the brain on multiple levels, cognitive, emotional, and sensory. You're not just watching the story. You're feeling it. You're living it. Here's the truth. Ghosts don't scare us as much as grief does. And curses? They're grief dressed in a cloak. They're the way we cope with watching someone die before their time. Brandon Lee, Heather O'Rourke, James Dean, Christopher Reeve. We don't want their deaths to be senseless. We want them to mean something. A curse becomes a kind of memorial. It keeps the person and the pain alive, and it gives us a way to talk about the unspeakable. We want to believe because the alternative is worse. Tragedy is random, that death is indifferent, that sometimes people just die, and that's it. But if there's a curse, then at least the story continues. But not everyone buys the story, of course. Skeptics will tell you that all of this, every fire, every accident, every death can be explained. They'll say Poltergeist used real skeletons because it was cheaper. That Brandon Lee's death was a tragic result of negligence, not prophecy. That James Dean drove too fast, that Christopher Reeve fell off a horse, and that George Reeves was a victim of depression, not a curse. And they're right. On paper, none of these events are supernatural. But the thing is, curses don't need to be real to feel real. In his article, Hollywood Curse Legends, skeptic Joe Nickell points out that we remember the anomalies. We forget the norm. Thousands of movies are made without tragedy. But the few that go wrong, those are the ones we retell. And the more we retell them, the more they grow. It's the perfect storm of psychology, storytelling, and fear. Effective forecasting, terror management, pattern-seeking brains, throw in a dash of tragedy, and suddenly your horror film becomes haunted, even if the ghost is just in the audience's imagination. But what's more powerful than that? A film you feel is cursed. A death that lingers in the corners of a scene. A scream that hits different when you know what happened after the credits rolled. Skeptics may debunk, but believers feel it. And sometimes that's enough. At the heart of every cursed film is a collision between myth and memory, between fear and fact, between what we know and what we feel. Some stories you watch once and forget, but cursed films, you carry those. You whisper them at parties, you link them in Reddit threads, you tell your friends, did you know she died after filming this scene? And suddenly the movie's alive again. Whether it's a warning, a tragedy, or just a coincidence wrapped in shadow. One thing's for sure. In Hollywood, fear never dies. It simply gets recast. Thank you for joining us on today's journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this episode of Hauntings and Happenings, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow seekers of the strange. Got a story, theory, or a haunted hotspot you want us to explore? Reach out to us at our email, hauntingsandhappenings@gmail.com, and you might just hear it in a future episode. Remember, the world is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered, and together, we'll keep searching. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, stay spooky, and of course, keep it weird.